Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devu.com. In this lesson, I want to spend a bit of time talking about some of the smaller syntax elements in Visual Basic that you'll need to master in order to understand how a properly formed line of code is constructed. So in one of the first lessons, I may have briefly referred to the Visual Basic syntax having nouns and verbs and punctuation. And I want to elaborate on that just a little bit more and explain what I meant by that in this lesson. So just like the English language has parts of speech and it has punctuation, the same thing is true in software development, and the Visual Basic programming language is no exception. So we're going to talk about those building blocks to create those sentences, those basic building blocks to create instructions in Visual Basic. And so statements are like sentences. Statements are complete thoughts in Visual Basic. They're like complete sentences. And a statement is made up of one or more expressions. And in turn, an expression is made up of operators and operands. All right, so it goes statements. Statements are made up of expressions, and expressions consist of operators and operands. So we've seen statements, obviously, just simply lines of code, executable instructions that we've given the compiler whenever we type them into our module 1.vb. Expressions are, some examples of expressions are things like a method call. So console.writeLine passing in an empty string or hello world, whatever the case might be. Whenever we use the if statement, we evaluated an expression to see whether it evaluated it true or false. So the expression portion of that was user value equals 1. So if user value equals 1, then execute this code block below it, okay? And then also there are expressions of assignment where we're assigning the value of a variable equal to some other value, okay? So each of those are examples of expressions, and they have two things in common. They are made up of operators and operands. So an operand is similar to a noun in a sentence. They're things that are nameable, okay? So variables, that would be a good example of an operand. But things like literal strings, that's an operand, or a literal number like the number 7, that would be an operand as well. And so these are easy to remember because you're creating these yourself. You're giving names to variables or even classes or objects as we get further along. And you're giving value to literal numbers and literal strings, right? So operators are similar to verbs. So you have operands are like nouns, operators are like verbs, and they will act on the nouns. So they're things like, for example, the addition operator or the equality or assignment operator or the string concatenation operator. Typically, you're going to use built-in operators, whereas operands, you name them yourselves. Typically, operators are provided by the programming language. Now, there's exceptions in both cases. You could create your own operators or overload operators. That's kind of an advanced topic, so this is a little bit loosey-goosey, I guess you could say. And there's quite a few built-in operators, and you're going to need to memorize many of them because it's how you're going to perform actions on your operands, the things that you come up with, the intent of your code. So fortunately, as you're getting started, you can use kind of a subset of all of the operators that are out there, and then learn them, commit them to memory over time, and not have to refer to a cheat sheet whenever you need to remember them. So to kind of help facilitate this, what I did was create a project offline called Operators, Expressions, Statements, and I merely created the code that you see here. And you don't have to type this in yourself. You can just open up this project if you want to follow along on your local computer, because I don't know that there's any real value to typing this in. This application doesn't really do anything. It's just illustrating code ideas, okay? So if you run it, it's not, I don't even know if it'll do anything, honestly. I don't think it has any, yeah, it has a console write line at the end, but that's about it. Okay, so just want to walk through quickly. This is not an exhaustive list, but this will give you a few to chew on and to work with initially. We've covered some of these already. We'll add on a few during this lesson. And you can expand your vocabulary of operators and keywords and so forth over time. But in each of these cases, an expression is made up of an operand, like a literal string or a variable or an object, and an operator. So an operator is something like the assignment operator. So here we have an operand, which is x, and an operand, which is the literal value of 3, and the operator is acting on the value of x. So the way we would read this, the value of 3 is being assigned to x. All right. So you see the associativity of the code and the direction. It will go from right towards the left. So anything on the right will be evaluated first, and then it gets assigned to the value that's on the left. All right, so that's the assignment operator. We have the addition operator, the subtraction operator, the multiplication operator, the division operator. So these are things that you would probably come to expect. Then you can see we looked at the equality operator to see if two values are in fact equal or not, true or false, x equals y. Now there's some other variations on this. We can check, for example, if x is greater than y. Now, in numeric terms, the greater than, the less than operator, the greater or equal to, and the less than or equal to operators, they're all pretty easy to understand, but you might be working with dates or strings, in which case the greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to might be a little harder to understand what is being compared. Is it the length of the string? Is it the whether they're alphabetical order or not, and so on. All right. Then there are conditional operators, the conditional or and the conditional and operator, so that you can tie two expressions together and evaluate them. So x is greater than y, a is greater than b, if either of these are true. So if this is true or this is true, then perform the code that you see in that code block. The AND operator is inclusive, so both have to be true in order for this to happen. So x must be greater than y and a must be greater than b in order for the code inside of the if statement to be executed. All right. We've also talked about the member access operator, the period, and how that allows us to call a particular method of an object or a class. In this case, we've been calling the WriteLine method of the console class by using the period in order to access it. Now, in this way, the associativity goes from left to right. So we start with the console object, and then we call into its WriteLine method, and then we pass in a input parameter of a literal string. And so in this case, also, I just want to point out that the double quotation marks, that is the literal string operator. And then there are other operators, like, for example, the as operator. Now you could say as is a keyword, dim is a keyword, that's all true, sub is a keyword, module is a keyword. But if it acts on operands, then it's also a operator. In this case, it acts on the operand of b, assigning it a data type of integer. All right, so why am I telling you all of this? Well, because the syntax rules of a programming language really do matter. So for example, I can't just do that and expect anything to happen. I mean, Visual Basic Compiler will look at that and say, what are you trying to do? You've only given me expression, and an expression, it's not a complete statement. I need more than just an expression in order to do something, okay? So in this case, we're only just doing x plus y, but x plus y what? All right, what do you want me to do with this? So in situations like these, you can see Visual Studio will actually catch these syntactical errors as compilation errors. We can't even run the application. We can't even compile this code into an executable. that will run inside of the .NET Framework CLR, the .NET Framework runtime. Why not? Because the code cannot be compiled and turned into a language that is acceptable by the .NET Framework runtime. So in that case, you can see it. The code editor gives us this red squiggly line letting us know that we have a problem in our code, and so it anticipates the issues with the code by pre-compiling as we're typing. All right. If we were to hover our mouse cursor over it, we're going to get some very vague explanation as to the problem. Method arguments must be enclosed in parentheses. So it thinks that what we're trying to do is call some sort of method like this. Right? And even so, it's still going to have some issues. All right. So basically, we don't even have enough code here for Visual Basic to give us a good error message, unfortunately. And so essentially, we just have to be aware of the fact that when we type in a line of code, we have to kind of be purposeful and understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. If we don't have the right set of expressions filled with operator and operands, as we had here just a moment ago, then we're not creating a properly formed statement. Since we don't have a statement, it can't really do anything with that code that we write. So for beginners, all you really need to understand is that there's a proper syntax in Visual Basic, just like there are rules for the English language, just like there is proper grammar in the English language. So understanding that is a big step to solving your own problems whenever you're phrasing Visual Basic instructions that the Visual Basic compiler will accept and compile down into a language that the .NET Framework runtime can understand. So I tell you what, let's go ahead and stop right here. Let's recap the things that we talked about in this lesson. First of all, we said that statements are complete instructions in Visual Basic. They consist of expressions, and a statement is like a sentence in the English language. And expressions are things that contain nouns and verbs, the combination of the two. Okay, so actual expressions are made up of operands and operators, and an operand is a thing. It's like a variable or a literal string, something that we give value and importance to by naming it or giving it value. And so for now, you can think of, for example, the console class. That's an operand. And the variables that we've created, those are operands. Whereas operators, and we spent a lot of time looking at operators here, and there are even more than that that we didn't talk about. Like, I don't know if I said anything about the method invocation operators, but this is definitely an operator that will kick off the execution of a method, right? So there are lots of different types of operators, and you'll need to learn the operators in order to perform actions on the operands that you create, and that gives the instructions, the proper instructions to that formulate your program. Now, we've already been using these operators for all sorts of purposes until now. Even if we didn't identify them specifically as operators, we're still using them, and just understand that they are what actually do things in the application. And just by giving, for example, X, or giving console, by itself on its own line, it's not going to accomplish anything. We have to use operators. And we have to use operands. This is an operand, okay, in order to accomplish things in our applications. And that's all I wanted to say. All right, so hopefully that was helpful in diagnosing and understanding the code as you write it. All right, let's continue on the next lesson. We're doing great. See you there. Thanks.